This series is about role-playing games that have shaped our hobby and continue to do so, with many games on the market and so many older games and editions available in PDF and print-on-demand forms from DriveThruRPG and elsewhere. Our hobby can be a confusing place for new and even some veteran players. Here I'm attempting to dispel some of that confusion by running through the history of each game, giving an overview of its play features, sharing my thoughts on it, and outlining the essentials to pick up if you want to give it a go. We hit the Wild West today with a fun little, simple yet immersive game of gunslingers and their ilk, and the hunt for a few dollars more than a fistful. Welcome to Western City. Western City has a pretty short history as far as the games that we usually cover here. It was written by Jorg Dunn and released in 2009, published by Prometheus Games in its softcover German edition, and Vagrant Workshop in its English first edition via PDF. Vagrant partnered with Mongoose to produce a softcover English version towards the end of 2009, and from 2012 the current third printing of the game is distributed in English and German versions via DriveThruRPG by Pro Indie Vagrant Workshop, an amalgamation of Vagrant Workshop and its German arm, Pro Indie, now collated into a single entity. Pro Indie Vagrant Workshop have some interesting, inexpensive games to their name, alongside German editions of various games such as the Middle-earth role-playing reimagining that is Against the Dark Master. They're worth checking out if you have an interest in niche indie games. Western City is a collaborative storytelling role-playing game set within a loosely defined spaghetti western theme, although it would work perfectly well for pretty much any theme, as we'll talk about later. It uses a mixture of dice, poker chips, dollar coins, preferably of suitable age, and the usual pencils and paper as materials. Since activity within the game is very much set within the mind's eye, no miniatures or battle maps are needed. The game notes its ideal group size as 3 to 5, all of whom are players. There is no referee or game master here, but if at least one of the players has a good grasp of the rules, that is definitely a boon. Each player controls a main character, a hero, plus several extras who are background characters to the hero's stories. Characters have a profession which the players are expected to define for themselves, giving them a great deal of freedom within the scope of the game's spaghetti western theme. Profession counts as a skill. Each of the characters has 3 attributes: body, mind, and charisma, to which players assign a matrix of 3, 4, 4 or 2, 3, 5. Health is measured by heart points, and each character has 8 of those. The game includes lists of skills associated with each of the 3 attributes, and players choose 5 from these lists that fit with their hero's definition. To these, players assign a rank of 3 to 2 skills, and a rank of 2 to the remaining 3 skills. Their chosen profession acts as a skill in its own right, covering all of the general areas of expertise encompassed by the definition. Heroes begin with a rank of 4 within that profession skill we mentioned earlier. Attributes determine the size of dice pool used when rolling for success, and skill rank determines what numbers on a 6-sided die count as success within the dice pool. With an attribute value of 3 and a skill rank of 4, for example, you would roll 3 6-sided dice, and each die with a value of 1 through to 4 would count as a success. Players select a special item and a negative personality trait, called a hubris, decide where their character lives, and notes down the character's background. And that, for a hero character, is that. Special items can be called into play at relevant points, and characters can acquire more of them, but only 3 may be possessed by a character at any one time. Players create 2 extra characters each. Extras. The one who is a friend of their character and one who is a foe. These follow the same creation process, but are assigned lower numbers for attributes, skills, and heart. Extras are recorded on an index card or on the small playing card character sheet provided in the rulebook, as opposed to the digest-sized sheet used to record heroes and their exploits. At the beginning of play, each player is given 5 poker chips and $1 coin. Actually, this latter can be any kind of marker, but using something fitting to the game's theme can help to invoke the immersion. Each, in turn, introduces their hero and their extras. And once that's done with, each player then notes down an extra that isn't one of their own as an acquaintance of their hero. Finally, all of the extras are gathered up and set down as a pool in the middle of the table, or whatever playing space is being used. Players then engage in a round of bidding for the remaining extras. Not all extras need to be subject to this. Only those extras particular players want to claim ownership of go through this. Any extras not owned by the end of this bidding process are returned to the pool and can only be called on for a single scene. More on that later. The bidding process has players put poker chips into a pot for a particular extra he or she wants, or for whatever other purpose the bidding is for. If another player wants that same extra, or to win that particular round of bidding, they will need to outbid the other players involved by putting in more chips. Say, for example, one player puts in 2 chips, another puts in 3, and a third puts in 4 chips. The player that put in 4 chips wins that particular round, or that extra at the beginning of the game. Once bidding has been completed, the chips in the pot are distributed evenly amongst all of the players that did not win the extra at hand, or the bidding focus. Any odd chips are left in the pot. So continuing our example, there are 9 chips in the pot. The player that put in 4 chips wins that round of bidding, and the 2 other players, assuming that there are only 3 players in total playing, if there are more players that did not bid at all, are included in this pot distribution, receive back 4 chips each. Because this amounts to 8 of the 9 chips, the odd remaining chip remains in the pot for the next round of bidding, wherever that might take place. This bidding process is a key factor to the game and follows this general form wherever it pops up. At the end of this process, each player will have their hero character plus 1 or more extras, at least one of which having been created by another player. And now it's time for the next stage. The first stage of play is to determine the general outline of plot for a game day, as will be experienced by the characters. Players take turns in suggesting events for that day. Each player submits at least 2 events for the day, one of which should be connected to the hero's goals, the other being of a more general nature, preferably providing some action or forwarding of narratives that may have been building during the previous days. Players can veto other player-suggested events, which I'll go into in a sec, but the 2 events per player minimum should be met without counting vetoed events. Daily step 2 is to determine each character's goals for the day. This should relate to one of the events and the overall goals of the hero. If a character accomplishes a daily goal, that character receives an award, either an adventure point or a special item. Goals can be relatively simple or complex, but must involve at least a modicum of challenge. The goal should be noted down, but not necessarily revealed to the other players. Once all of this has been done, the players work together to arrange the daily events into a sequence that makes some form of narrative sense, mixing scenes with a lot of action between scenes of a quieter nature. Once that's completed, play begins with a narrative prologue, Dawn, to set the day up, and the first event occurs, the first scene of the day. The narrative of a particular scene is framed by a controlling player. In order to establish control, a round of bidding occurs. I told you it was integral to the game. The player that wins gets to frame the scene, the characters, heroes and extras that are present, the location that scene takes place in, and what the characters present are doing there. If a player doesn't like a particular element of a scene, they can attempt to veto it. Again, we'll deal with vetoes in a second. The activity of the scene is played through the players controlling characters, heroes or extras within it. Other players being able to buy facts to insert into the scene as it plays out, or even buy their own characters into the scene at some stage. To do this, a player puts a chip into the pot, and buying an extra can lift one from their hands of extras, or the pool, or an entirely newly created one, who will go into the pool if still alive at the end of the scene. Generally speaking, one player should only control one character, hero or extra, during the course of a scene. If some plot point arises during a scene which causes a player to control more than one character, they should pass one of the extras that they have in their scene to another player, one who currently has no characters in the scene. The extra will return to the player's ownership at the end of the scene. Characters can also be switched during a scene by throwing a chip into the pot. The currently controlled character is retired from the scene and the new character comes in. Hubris, those negative traits heroes possess, can be activated during a scene by a player by throwing a chip into the pot and stating which character's hubris takes effect. The character's hubris must then be used to frame their actions during the scene. The scene's narrative thus evolves and is played through until its goals, set by the framer, have been met, and then it is on to the next scene. As for vetoes, these are another important aspect of the collaborative form of the play that the game takes, and manages potential conflict and argument within the game structure, rather than between players in a more unhealthy way. To make a veto, a player puts a chip into the pot and states, "Not in my town, not at this time." The player that is being vetoed then has the option to change whatever it was he was putting forward, or dispute the term. If the veto is disputed, it is resolved by a round of bidding, and the winner gets to decide if the veto is upheld or not. Once all scenes for the day have been played out, the final act of the day arrives: dusk. Dusk is the opportunity for players to sum up the events of the day so that everyone is up to speed ahead of the next day's rounds of event creation and sequencing. The dollar coin, or whatever marker you use to represent it, has a special purpose. This is for players to buy control of a particular scene to frame around their hero and his or her goals. This is a high noon scene. During a high noon scene, the player that's used their coin automatically becomes the framer, and other players cannot spend chips to veto their framing of the scene, nor to buy in facts or characters. High noon scenes are best bought when the scene stands the greatest chance of meeting the character's goals for a day. High noon scenes can only be called by players once per play session, regardless of how many days that session might cover. Resolution of a scene or activities within it may require skill checks. These are made simply by rolling a number of dice equal to the value of the attribute which controls the skill. The rank of the skill, as we've noted, determines the die results that produce a success. The more successes, the greater the result of the skill check. Where skilled contests are concerned, the winner is the one with the most successes. In these cases, if a draw results, then the character with the highest pertinent skill rank wins. If that ties, repeat the test. A fumble occurs when all of the dice rolled for the test result in failure. What the results, success or failure or fumble, mean is determined by the scene, the framer, and players inserting facts. Combat uses skill checks, with each success on the part of the winner reducing the target's heart by 1 point. If several targets are involved, these successes may be distributed between them. Successes can also be used in defence, blocking successes scored by an attacker. 2 points of heart are regained at the end of each scene, or 4 points at the end of a scene in which a character did not participate. First aid can replenish 1 point of heart per fight, and medical skills can restore up to half inflicted damage. Each combat contest, and combats or arguments can encompass non-fighting forms of conflict too. They continue until an opponent flees, surrenders, or is reduced to 0 heart. 0 heart does not necessarily result in death, and certainly doesn't for non-combat arguments. Characters only die when players want them to die, for the narrative effect rather than to satisfy game mechanics. Once the players all agree that the narrative has run its course, the story or the adventure comes to a conclusion. Adventure points are awarded according to goals achieved, how well players have portrayed their characters, and so on. These points can be spent in gaining extra special items, a home for the character to live in, or improving skills or attributes. And then it's on to the next story. Western City also includes rules for bringing Weird West facets into play, and magic and monsters, for instance. Personally, this isn't a particular favourite genre of mine, but the option is there for those that like them. Western City is a narrative, collaborative role-playing game that may take players of a traditional RPG such as Dungeons & Dragons a little time to get the hang of. There may be a lot of unlearning of what an RPG is and can do during the process. The rules are easy, and the use of good props for chips and high noon coins especially can invoke the game's genre and setting. Collaborative storytelling is something that can create arguments where players start taking the game in directions that are out of the comfort zone of other players, and the concept of vetoes serves to alleviate this somewhat. However, I suggest, more so than with most other RPGs, that the players agree on anything that might be taboo ahead of time. And at all times, bear in mind that play should be about fun for everyone. The rulebook is pocket-sized, which means it is perfect for taking on holidays and camps. A small handful of dice and any conveniently sized pebbles or other natural matter, and you're good to go with materials for playing around a campfire or similar. The rules are also adaptable to all sorts of directions. The language is, of course, evocative of its spaghetti western default theme, but I can see the game being used for any collaborative storytelling genre: space opera, Austen romances, horror, or even fantasy, and the inclusion of the magic rules within the rulebook is helpful there. It's a wonderful little game that stretches people's imaginations, builds up their powers of narration, and can be good as a team-building tool. When I'm in the wilds with the right sort of people, it certainly gets thrown into the backpack. Well, this is going to be one of the shortest of these sections ever. Simply put, Western City is the rulebook is all you need. ProIndie does have PDF downloads of the character sheets on their website, and grabbing those is also a good idea. I'll link in the description. It's a wonderful game, with a scope well beyond its pages, with some nice touches to manage collaborative play. It's also inexpensive, so there's no reason why a fan of the different methods of role-playing shouldn't have a copy of this in their collection.